Okay. Yes, Child Development 205. This is chapter 9. This is intellectual disabilities. Are we on it? Intellectual disabilities?
Mm-hmm.
I know what I'm doing. Just sometimes I forget that I know what I'm doing. So welcome. I'm gonna turn it over to Professor Fernandez, and I'm gonna shut off my video for a second. I'll be right back.
Hi guys. Okay, I was looking at the syllabus tonight and we were just recapping and realizing that we're almost done with unit 2 and the film analysis should have gone out. So we were able to put it all together. We did this weeks ago and then just didn't realize the date. Have any of you guys looked at well, it just went out. So you probably have not looked at the assignment at all. Okay, so let's talk about it. So you guys, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different movie options you can choose from and 4 different TV options to choose from. If you do a TV option, we're asking you to look at the season. So you are to watch the movie or the season and then do an analysis on it. And so then that will be section number 2. So we want you to, in a clear, collegial, written format, APA style, we want you to analyze either the movie or the season. And so the questions you're going to be answering are these, and let's go over them real quick. How did you learn of the character's disability? The movies and TV things that we have picked, minus one that I can think of, the disability plays a major role in the film or the season. So you just need to explain how that comes to be. What role did the disability play? How the character with the disability thinks, talks, or feels about their own disability. Attitude of characters toward the character who has the disability. So you're looking at its social environment on that one. What supports did the character require? Any mention of their schooling or history of educational pursuits. And if there isn't, then just state that, but you can show any, like if they're in job related kind of situations. I know I recently watched Coda, and him being he fishes, he's a fisherman. That affected his job because he couldn't hear the Coast Guard. So if it's not related to schooling, then talk about how it relates to their vocation, their occupation. Looking for a minimum of 3 pages, APA format. The rubrics is pretty clear. You want an analysis, the actual application. How is it looking format, and is it complete? Do you have a thesis and supporting sentences? Do we have a beginning, a middle, and an end? So the movies, let's look at some of, do you guys have any questions about that? It's a paper, we're writing a paper. Okay, so let's look at some of the movies. Peanut Butter Falcon. I haven't seen it, but have you guys? She's the one who saw it, and I looked it up. Did you guys
so good.
Is it so good? I'm gonna watch it then. Okay, good. Shia LaBeouf is in it, I think, right? He's the biggest actor. Yeah. Okay. Coda. I did just recently see this on Prime, and you guys are not use the accounts you currently have. Do not buy anything. Coda is on Prime. It's about the deaf and hard of hearing community, and the entire movie is based on that community. They have a daughter who has hearing, and kind of how the roles switch. She doesn't fit into their deaf and hard of hearing community. Children of a Lesser God. So I think a large reason why we chose these movies is because, and these TV episodes, the characters themselves have the disabilities. So these aren't actors. They are actual people that are actors that also have a disability. So in Coda, the mother's character, Marlee Matlin, also won an Academy Award for Children of a Lesser God in 1986. So she's a big actress, and she is deaf, and so signs throughout them. A Quiet Place. I don't know if you guys saw that one, A Quiet Place 1 or A Quiet Place 2. The daughter in it is deaf and signs, and that plays a huge role in in them staying alive. I don't know if you've seen it. And then Christmas Ever After. I've never seen this one. Have you guys seen this one? No. Okay. Let's look at the TV. Love on the Spectrum. Who has seen this one? Yes, it's made quite a.
It's so good.
It is. Michael will make everybody just swoon. It's made quite an impression on Netflix, and so they made season 2, which is so exciting to see it. It really is a cute little reality show, and I think they did a really good job of not putting anybody down, of just keeping it like you would watch any, like The Bachelorette. It was really, really, I thought, well done. And I loved that there was a job coach, like that was a dating coach. Couldn't we all use one of those? So I thought that was a neat occupation to look at. I'm not familiar with Special. Are you guys? No? Okay. Breaking Bad. I don't know if you guys remember that, but the son has cerebral palsy, and that is a major reason as to why he goes into making drugs. And there's episodes related, I believe in season 1, specifically to the fact that his son has cerebral palsy. And then Separated at Birth, and that again goes to the deaf and hard of hearing. Are you guys familiar with that one?
Kind of. I think I've seen like an episode or 2.
Okay. So you're just gonna watch either a season or a movie and then tell us how the disability played a role in it. Does that make sense? Any questions? No? Okay. And if you guys have a movie that you want to talk about, I think just let us know, and I'm pretty sure we could probably make the accommodation, but have fun with it. It should be fun. Okay. Let's dive into, she's not back, but we will dive.
When's it due?
Getting there.
Oh, you're back. When is it due? Well, it's set October 15th. So we are a little tardy. Technically it is a unit 2 assignment. Unit 2 ends next week. So
do it after next week.
Right. So if you wanted to stay on target, it would be due that next Sunday the 7th.
Never on target, but
yeah, I know. So if we just around it,
yes.
So
Okay.
You look very gestury. I feel like I need to go get my hat for the day.
There you go.
So when we had I think it was like 2 years ago, when we had the Great American Shakeout, and it was at night, and I had a class. We all put on hats and did the evacuation with hats on.
Little parade.
Oh yeah, no, I'm
to bring out the fun.
So for the where's this guy?
Oh, it's now a fashion show. It's moved on to different levels.
Why not? So for the film analysis, what do you guys think? You just said the 7th? And it's a target date, so we can be a little bit late, but
yeah, that works for me.
Yeah.
Because I can't do it till that weekend. Anyway.
Okay,
And
I have no time to watch movies.
Yes.
But we also don't want to like overlap it when you're like working on an exam.
Ew.
Right. So the end of next week is an exam. So maybe we need to bump it one more week.
Yeah. I mean, for me personally, the 5th through the 7th, I'm good. And even like that Monday and Tuesday. So that could,
and these are target dates still. So you don't have
they're not hard dates. It's just
have to kill yourself to get it in there. Because here's another piece. Some of the movies suggested in there are characters with disabilities we haven't covered yet. So that might make a choice, right? So if there's like a person from the deaf community but you really love that and you want to like kind of look ahead a little bit, that works. Or if you have a pretty decent knowledge of like deaf community, or you just want to talk about the stuff that we've done before, learning disabilities, intellectual disabilities, things like that. So it's up to you. But again, even if you took an extra week or 2, we just don't want it to bunch up at the end. There is one other thing I did launch. We were talking about launching Portfolium, and I decided to kind of break it down into a couple of spots. I didn't tell you, Professor Fernandez.
Oh.
And I didn't realize I launched it. So if you look under, I think it's a sign.
Okay. Do you want to have this back? I'm going to stop sharing and you take it back.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll do that. And it's going to take me a second because I don't think I'm logged on yet. Oh, hold on. It's like barking at me. You cannot minimize this if you are recording. Oh, Thank you. Okay, yes, here I am. I'm in the module. So Portfolio's always been on the syllabus, always at the end, but I was thinking like, instead of it, again, bunching up at the end, I kind of broke it down into little pieces. There was a training on it this week. We also have a video on it that was provided from an earlier training because I had this class that was 8 weeks. Let me see if I have it. Where did I put it? I'm so organized. I didn't realize I'm so organized. Hold on. Hold on. I think it's under where it says, portfolio. Let's see what it says. Assignments. No. Oh, yes. Okay. So let me pull it up and then share the screen. There we go. Okay, good. Okay, so again, portfolio was kind of like the end of the semester project, but I figured let's not like chunk it all up at the end. Nobody has extra time in December. Nobody, no one. No one's got extra money or extra time in December. No one. So what it is that you're going to have put everything together, but we're going to do little steps at a time. And I think I just have it broken down into 4 little steps. And so the week 1, so overview, let's talk about overview. Portfolio was kind of like LinkedIn. Anybody here use LinkedIn or familiar with LinkedIn? Yeah, okay, so LinkedIn is kind of like a live resume. And our goal here for people working with people is to have your skills in one place. It's kind of like the old report cards are nice, your transcripts are nice. But when somebody gets an A, that doesn't tell you the skills that they've built. So portfolio kind of breaks down skills and says like, this is the one class I took and these are, you can upload your documents and we're going to do that in further steps. But right now we're just going to get familiar with portfolio. So I think I put the due date for next week. No, I put it for this week, but I'll move it back a week. Like, again, this is kind of like, you literally could do all 4 steps at the end, but I would not suggest to do that. Just do a little bit at a time. This one you're just going to go to portfolio.com and get familiar with it. That's it. That's it. And I did put here, I should probably add, I started this from a different class. So I'm going to add Professor Fernandez's name here too. And you go to portfolio.com and you start putting together just like, who are you? Like, where, it'll ask you questions. Where do you go to school? You don't have to put in your address or anything like that. But it's literally going to ask you, where did you go to school? What classes have you taken? You can set these things up. There is a training video here. Right? So it's pretty intuitive. You'll see it almost looks like Facebook. It has like a header and your picture. And think of this as like, again, a live resume. And so you are going to, by the end of the semester, have this built, and ultimately all of your classes can go in here. Think of it as like a folder, right? Another good reason to have this is that if for some reason your computer takes a hike, all your work that you've uploaded is in portfolio. Before portfolio was created, I do have a LinkedIn account. I do put my PowerPoints, presentations, syllabus, everything from all the schools that I worked at. And how do you think I got this job? Literally applying for this job, it says, do you want to apply with LinkedIn? Clicked one button and it populated everything. So portfolio is like the next step before LinkedIn. And portfolio is owned by Instructure, which owns Canvas. So you guys seeing how this stuff is starting, the old paradigm of education is not holding water anymore. We need to look at education as like, I mean, how many people do you know have some sort of degree and it's just not, it never really solidified. And you're like, well, I'm glad for you that you have a degree, but what are you going to do with it? This is that part of that, right? So it's no longer book smarts versus street smarts. It's like, show us what you've learned and how it applies to a job. And again, we would love for you to work with kids. If you're not going to work with kids, great. These are still skills to build in which to work with adults who could be childlike. Okay, so we're really looking at not just getting you guys grades on a transcript, but getting you guys prepared for the workforce. And I mean, if you're not working with kids, work with kids. I know Cece is, Molly is. Luce, are you working with kids? If not, this is going to get you kind of like one step closer there. Plus, our Child Development Center is hiring. Right? So you say, I mean, what's better? Walking in and saying, I'm kind of a good student, or here's my portfolio. You can see all my work. You can see my grades. And a resume. And we'll do that in the further steps. So this one's just getting comfortable with it. Make a profile, start playing around with it. Link to myself and Professor Fernandez. I will add her name in there. And all you're doing is submitting a link so we can peek at it. Yeah, that's it. And then they'll all do another step and another step and then a final step together. So it's not all waiting for the last week of school. That is a total pet peeve for me, because it's just like everything stacks up and stacks up, and I hate that. Good questions on this one. This is just seriously, and I think it's only 10 points, so don't freak out. You're just playing around.
I have to say, I'm super excited about this, Professor Laney, only because the people I know that I have interviewed and hired are people that I saw a permanent product from. So if they came in with a resume, that was baseline. You come in with a cover letter, that was baseline. People came in, or people that still come in with permanent product of how you change behavior, of the data philosophy you designed to take man data. Those are the ones that I knew were creative and could think outside of the box. And those are the ones I hired.
Huge, absolutely huge. Because again, a grade on a transcript does not tell us. It really doesn't. It tells us that you turned in a bunch of work and got a bunch of points. It doesn't tell if you can think on your feet. It doesn't tell if you know these certain, data collected things. It doesn't tell us that you know how to handle a parent that's really upset. And even if you're not handling the parent, you know enough to say, let me get my director for you. I'm sure she can help you. Those are skills, not grades. Right? So it's this piece where we're trying to build, as we're teaching you how to talk about the whole child, we're trying to build the whole professional. And this is part of it. So ultimately, as child development people start coming in, if this is I'm launching this in 107, 110, it's going to be in health and safety, diversity. So it's going to be this whole piece. So every class in your certificate or your permit is going to have a folder, and inside there, it's going to say, this is the work that I did in there. This is the observation data I took in 108. These are the lesson plans I made in 111B. Yeah. So again, because if you guys aren't aware of it, like pre-K and TK is going to become a credential in the state of California. There's some serious action moving towards that right now. And so you guys need to be able to prove that you got it, that you got the skills. Yeah. Because it's not just going to be about grades anymore. It's literally recalling them teacher performance expectations. And trust me, we're crunching data. We crunch data on every student at the end of the semester. It's crazy. So yeah, we're trying to make sure that you guys are well qualified, and just confident, just ready to go out there. Cool. So if you guys have any questions on this at any time, you can ask either one of us. We'll figure it out. But I would say watch the training video, because this came from Caroline Fortuno. She can also help you create a resume if you don't have one. And I'm considering having that as a requirement, some sort of resume, like at least one page. So we'll talk about that later. But yeah, lots of cool stuff here. And we want to make sure you guys are ready to go. Cool. Any questions? Cool. Let me add Professor Fernandez's name first, so I don't forget that. Because once I click off, it's over. You'll see a profile, and if Professor Fernandez, you don't have one, do you want me to just leave you off?
No, I want to make one. I told you, I think this is great program. I wished when I was in college, we had to make like a portfolio binder, 3 wings, like
okay. So can you talk about that for a second and why that's kind of ridiculous now?
I could show you it. I still have it. I still have my transcripts in it, my letters of recommendation. I've kept it to this day. I have a VH cassette video of me in my student teaching, because I had to bring it on my interview, and then to get my master's, that's how I got in. I showed that video. So I think this is awesome. And again, like having gone from doing that to hiring people, and that it's all succinct. And I wished I had kept better track of this amazing program I would take pictures of, or this family that had this really weird thing, and we had to sit through, like the child will do something here, but not here. And I had to problem solve it all throughout my career. I wish I would have taken pictures, or just really memorialized it, turned it into a permanent product. This makes it so much easier. This brings like the Instagram world into your hand versus my 3-ring binder. When I walk into an interview, nobody wants this thing. It's like the dinosaur that's walking into the thing. So you guys, this is so important. And no matter where you think you are now, you don't know where you're going to be in 20 years. And so you want to keep track of your work. You want to keep track of what you've done. You want to keep track. She was telling me, keep track of like what you write. She's so right. Like keep track of your accomplishments, because you want to keep moving up. And we're no longer in the place where you work at one company for 40 years, retire with a watch. That's just not how it goes anymore. So you be your advocate, be everything we're teaching you to be for these kids, and just memorialize it. Take a picture, use your phone, take a picture,
I tell you what, so I had to turn in a portfolio for my tenure, like this week.
Yeah.
And it was like
3-ring binder.
Yeah. And I suggested, for my goals was to suggest to HR to take this instead, take LinkedIn or a portfolio instead. Cause I was like, now all this stuff, now mind you, I'm a little bit wacky that I took pictures. I literally took pictures of doing the Great American Shakeout. I took a picture of me walking out there doing it.
You're so good to have done that though.
And then I put it on the cloud, and I have a 10-year folder. And so that'll be there. But this whole compilation thing, and yes, I have it in Word document, a PDF or whatever. It's still antiquated because it's in a
is it as antiquated as a VH video? Like
And listen, I'm going to give you guys a little, I'm going to pause the recording just for a second. Hold on one second. No, not that one. Hold on. I'm going to pause the recording just for 1 second. Talk about this. And information, information is constantly changing, but we do stand on the shoulders of giants as we build new pieces of information. So it's good to have stuff. I'm going to say right here, take a picture of it. Like all my kids stuff too. Yeah.
You guys are of the generation where this comes so much more natural to you than it does to me. I will keep my kids' artwork as opposed to a picture of it. You guys memorialize what you're eating for dinner, or this is your generation. Like so turn it into something that benefits you in the future. Just remember that if you're doing something that impressed you, take a picture of it, memorialize it.
Plus, and I'm going to tell you this, and then we'll move on. As you are creating new lessons and you're moving forward in your career and you're building these skills, like the old school is a little bit good. Like you can look back and say like, oh man, I did that. That was awesome. Let's do that again. And if you have it electronically, then it's electronic. Like you can bring it out, dust it off, update it, revamp it, add some new techniques in there or technology or whatnot. And so then I also look at it like, don't print it, save a tree.
Right. That's how Teachers Pay Teachers started.
Oh my God, it's brilliant.
That's how it started. All of these teachers had been doing the same thing and had to put it onto a system and have made money off of it. So you guys take that and show your brilliance. Just don't forget to do it.
Like, this is like the next step in the evolution of teachers and education.
Mm-hmm.
The students aren't hanging out and being like Little House on the Prairie students sitting at a desk, like perfect. Right. That ain't happening. That hasn't happened for 100 years, right? And now it's like, we need to really embrace this next level of evolution in education. And it's workforce prep, skill building, grades. The grades are like, flexible, and, we have to really look at all these pieces that really historically may have worked, but aren't working anymore.
Right.
Our format's different. Our tech is different. I mean, the fact that a lot of professors, and I can only speak here, but in our district, we had 50 something professors retire when we transitioned to remote, because they said, I don't want to keep up. I can't keep up, or I don't want to keep up with the technology, because we were required to have a certification to teach online, to like do this, what we're doing right now. Mm-hmm. We both have a certification. Mm-hmm. Professor Fernandez had to do it before she was even on the schedule. So some people, there's a point where like you evolve and you just like say, no, I'm calling it, right? And that's after 20 or 30 years, you're welcome to do that. But that just tells you that this whole next wave of technology, where it really is a second language.
Right.
I mean, when Peyton was 4, he knew the word buffering, so it's like, I went through grad school, 100% through grad school, did not own a cell phone, did not own a computer.
Oh yeah, no. I was in school when the internet came out, so we can. Yeah, no. I remember telling me to go on, dial up, and I was scared. I was going to blow up the school library. Yeah.
And you had to wait like 7 minutes to get.
Oh, totally. And I was probably just looking up like Pink Floyd, and I was just scared. Yeah. No, it's.
I had the dot matrix printers that you had to pull off the little things on the side.
Yep. No.
Talk about embarrassing. It was like.
But and we had talked about this, I think maybe with Molly a couple weeks ago, in terms of, are you ever done? No, you are always having to learn. And this technology portion has taken on a huge role in our lives.
I trust that you, like, we're saying stuff that you guys already know. I trust that you guys already got this. You guys got it down. But if the question ever comes up to you, should I take this training for this new piece of technology? I always lean in on yes.
Then write it down that you did.
I'm telling you, I guarantee you when I turned in my portfolio, there's a bunch of stuff in there I forgot. Trainings and whatnot, whatever. So like, and I'm telling you, like, even writing, I had a friend look at my resume to get this job because I was like runner up right before I got this job. And she's like, well, let me help you polish it up. She literally went through my resume and said like, well, didn't you present it in Washington, D.C. at the U.S. Department of Education? I was all, yeah, I did that. U.S. Department of Ed in Washington, D.C. I totally took it off of my resume. Like,
yeah.
And it was for math. So yeah, that looks super legit and super cool.
Yeah, it sure does.
It wasn't on my resume for like 10 years. I forgot.
Yeah.
So, it's always here. We're always here to help each other be the best versions of what we can be. So let us help you do that. That's why this is an upper division class. And that's why we're already seeing like upper division work here. And we're really excited to be here. So we're throwing a lot of stuff at you. We're just because we know you guys can handle it. So, all right. So any questions as I move on to the PowerPoint? Everyone's like, no, stop talking, move on.
Okay, PowerPoint.
Just remember, you guys have us live. You get to ask the questions first. Everybody else has to watch the video, right? So utilize your resources. We are right here. We're live. We're here and ready for you. Okay, so chapter 9. Oh, intellectual disabilities. The reason I put this one not in order, because remember we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 11. This was kind of big. Every once in a while I'll have a student be like, we're supposed to be on 7. No, we're not. I put 9 here for several reasons. One being that intellectual disabilities are very, very common. And a lot of times that is our first information into this world of special needs or unique learners. What are some other words? Let's talk about that for a second. What are some other words instead of the word special needs? Because I can tell you, Alicia and I, we both were like, that's not the best way to describe people at all. What would you guys say if you're telling somebody you're taking this class? Yes, it's called Intro to Special Needs, but how would you describe it to a coworker? What are some other terms that you would use?
Taking a class for children who have a need or who is.
It's good.
Yeah, you got it. That's, I mean, you could stop there and you like, we got it. Like, yeah, I need kids who have extra needs. And by the way, that's everybody. Everybody has a special need on a certain day. Again, me on a Monday morning or a Friday afternoon, I'm a different person, right? Seriously, like, don't come at me hard and fast either one of those times. It ain't gonna happen, okay? Or if I'm having a bad day, or if I'm not feeling great, or my son got suspended 5 times in the 2nd grade, 5 times in the 2nd grade. 4 of them are on a full man. So believe it or not, that there's a statistical significance. That's an 80% significance of this kid might have a bad day once a month. Yeah. Okay. So again, even your favorite, best, oh no, they're all your favorites, right? The best, typically developed, most compliant, happy-go-lucky, sweetest, most adorable student you've ever had, it's gonna have a bad day. So we tend to use phrases like learners who need more support. or Darcy says special populations, right? I don't like the term special needs. I think exceptional needs is okay, but it also has an idea of like a exception, like I think people use that word wrong. So they think it's, oh, it's all, everybody gets something normal except you. That's not what it means. Exceptional needs means a little bit above or extra, like extra. All right. So what are some other words? Like Molly, what do you guys use at your work when you have to identify a kid who's maybe needing some extra supports?
A kid who's having a hard day.
If you start
Honestly,
there, yeah, if you start
yeah.
there, then everybody's on the same playing field. But and thank you guys for using person first language. See how it rolls off naturally once you get it. Just rolls off naturally, right? I was guest lecturing in a professor's class at a different college yesterday, and just talking about person first language, and they started giggling because I was like, "Oh wait, you don't want me to call you the crutches girl? You don't want me to call you the COVID lady? No, why not?" So when we talk about students with intellectual disabilities, you know, there are some terms that we do not use anymore. So the old term, I mean, I used to have an actual graphic in here that said like all these like historical terms like idiot, moron, like literal words. And then in the last 50 to 100 years, we would say retardate, and then it turned into retarded, and we do not use that word anymore. Retarded literally could be used to describe when you're trying to slow down the rate of your oil paint from drying. I want to retard. I want to slow down something. Or music, if I was a musician and I was like doing an orchestra and like this is particular part of the song, it's on a retardando. It's Italian for slow down. So we don't use those things to describe people, right? And so instead of retarded, we say, we call that the R word now. We say intellectual disability. Intellectual disability. But that can mean so many different things, right? So we're talking about our smarts. Now, like every chapter, and we'll go through it, every chapter, it tells you when it started, what to expect, if there's mild, medium, mild, moderate, severe, what types of supports, how long they need the supports, how often they need the supports. This chapter is no different. So you're starting to see this layout of the book, which is kind of nice. So it's like a little bit more predictable. So, and again, I want to thank Professor Fernandez for like filling in the gaps on my PowerPoints that I start all genius-like, and then obviously get distracted along the way because half of them are blank pages and whatnot. She was like, I'll fill it in. So thank you. Yeah, I noticed that it went from like, oh, I don't know, 20 slides to like 50. So
yeah, I'm sorry.
there's so much to say. And you know what? This group of people can be very endearing.
This intellectual disabilities takes on everything we touch in this world. So it's just it's a huge umbrella.
Yeah. And I don't know why I didn't download the oh, I could download the PDF, or I could just scroll. I'll just scroll because I'm just, you know, that's where I'm at today. Just like a half a step behind. I usually pride myself on a half a step ahead, but today's been a half a step behind, but no, such is life. But you guys can see it, right? Or no? Have I shared the screen?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, but then I'm always like struggling with like, why is my screen, my little Zoom box so big? So I made it small. Okay, cool. So thank you again. Notice I didn't even have the reference to the book and you put it in there. So thank you so much. So Julianne Penny, I know, not a great picture of her. And she was one of the first people who kind of she became almost like a celebrity in a way. She has a mild form of intellectual disability. She's a mother, she's an advocate, and she got her degree. So a Bachelor of Arts degree in journalism, not easy. That's writing and media and all that kind of stuff. And then she also, so again, where I like how it says like recognizes expert in self-advocacy. She literally was on the President Obama's on the first committee for intellectual disabilities. So, I mean, she's like overjoyed there. It's really sweet. If you Google her and you can find out a little more about her, she's got kids. I think they're teenagers now. It's really kind of cool. And so people with intellectual disabilities are in society. Again, this is one of these things that you cannot tell. A lot of disabilities are invisible. And again, how do you know somebody's IQ? What does it look like on that? You don't know. Right. And if somebody, just remember an average IQ, and we'll talk more about that, an average IQ can go up or down based on stress or whatever's going on in the day. It doesn't really change a whole lot. It's like, you could be super smart, but then being super stressed and your brain's not working, or undercaffeinated, hypercaffeinated, having an allergic response or whatever, just having an off day, and your smarts are there, but they're not really there. So the fact that we have opened up our conceptual ability to look at people who might historically have a little bit lower of an IQ, that doesn't mean they're less of a person. Again, this goes back to person first language. And I really just liked how they talked about intellectual disabilities as a pretty broad category. In terms of working with kids, there's a few that will get identified even before they're born, but sometimes you don't know these things until they get a little bit older. So intellectual disabilities, again, sometimes you can see it and you've already identified it and they're in your program for a certain reason. And then sometimes it kind of just like shows up later. Again, preschool and K is not really academic. When you get into K is academic, but when you get into 1 and 2 and it gets harder, then you can start seeing that performance gap that we talked about. Those are some of the red flags, like, oh, there's something there. And Alicia, when's the earliest you can do an IQ test on a kid? I thought it was
they tend to do it like between 7 and 9 in the school districts.
Yeah.
Prior to that, we'd be looking at developmental milestones. And so you're going to get your 2, I know you haven't talked about this yet, but you're going to get your 2 standard deviations based upon assessment measurements. So standardized scores. So it's not intellectual, but it is objective information for their age, and that is correlational to future IQ.
Right.
So yeah.
So like, for example, specifically, if you had a 2-year-old who was not identified with ASD or any genetic disorder, and they were barely verbal, again, that doesn't tell you exactly that there's an ID in the future, but it could be
correlational, right? So let's say you had a 2-year-old and you did a standardized assessment on this child, which is just like what an IQ test is, a standardized assessment. You do the standardized assessment, and let's say that they are 2 standard deviations below. So then they're functioning far below their age range. So you're going to say lower than just about a year old, which is about 50% of their age at 2 years. Right. So early intervention then would either get them closer to the age range, and you want to do that, but to match it, you get those cases, and those are the kids that kick themselves out of the system. If not, that gap's going to continue every year until they go from a standardized assessment of development to IQ.
It's 7 and 9. And again, IQ is a standardized assessment, but at the same time, we also don't hang our hat on that only.
Like, not at all. It just talks about right. It just talks about intellectual. You could take one. We could all take them and just get a snapshot of just your where it is. It does not speak of capability whatsoever.
Right. So again, speaking of that, Peyton did take an IQ test at 9, but because he's got African-American heritage, it is against the law in the state of California to give a child with African-American heritage an IQ test, because in the 70s, all the questions were very culturally saturated, meaning they were very white questions. And when we would ask kids of color, they would all fail. And then they would all go into some sort of identified program or get kicked out of a traditional program. So then somebody sued, and now there's this thing, but I think it's kind of pendulum is kind of swung back or whatever. So I got his doctor to do it. So the educational system cannot do it. It is against the law, the state of California to do that. But a doctor can do it, or psychologist can do it. And sure enough, these are 2 or 3 hour tests, because they're 12 little subsets and whatever.
They're horrible.
Yeah. I am telling you, because we were, he was 8. It was right before he got diagnosed with autism. And again, that's late for autism, but he has atypical high functioning autism. Anyway, so that was the one last thing that they were holding out on me. They're like, well, if his IQ is low, then it might be intellectual disability. And we're going to categorize him as this. It clearly wasn't low, but I was like, let's do the IQ test. Sure enough, my kid comes out in 2.5 hours and goes, that was fun. I was
he loved the testing.
He loved it. And I was like, what is the subtext for autism than that?
Right.
Like, oh, I
right.
got to
Those-
draw pictures of trucks and blah, blah, blah. I was like, I
those
literally fell
numbers
asleep.
and letters make sense.
I fell asleep
Yeah.
waiting for them. I was like, oh, and he came out, oh, this is really cool. And like his IQ is like 115. So it's like a little bit above, but it's not that piece where we'll learn about like super high savant.
Not exceptional.
or-
Right.
Yeah, he's not super duper exceptional. And
Right.
so they're like, and so then finally I got the diagnosis.
It's good. It's what I would aspire to be.
Well, the funny thing is that IQ does correlate to educational achievement.
Mhm.
And usually about 100 is about high school. And then like, as you go up like 110, 120, 130, 140, then you'll see a correlation to like PhD or whatever like that. So I was like, 115 means that he can get an AA or something, or, I'm like, some sort of collegiate experience is kind of what I'm going for as, as a professor mommy or whatever. So I was like,
Yeah.
whatever, we're good. Because quite frankly, and I'll show you pictures of him later, he does have the phenotype for fetal alcohol syndrome. In fact, I've got a picture. He has, and we'll talk more about intellectual disabilities. I'm not sure if we can see this. This is when he was.
You can see it, although I that picture just does, it looks like a beautiful young boy. It doesn't,
Right.
You cannot see, if I were to see that son or that child, I would not say there's fetal alcohol, but
You see. And when he was super little, I'm telling you, I put him like side by side, the pictures in the book. Usually you'll see the phenotype is a hooded eye, the wide part of the nose here, and a
little
flat.
bit of space. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and it was like, oh no, because kids with fetal alcohol syndrome can have an IQ of like 65,
Mhm.
not 100, but like 65. And that gives you just a lifelong set of challenges. Nobody.
This the chapter went into a great job about talking about fetal alcohol syndrome, and if I'm not mistaken, it is risen in terms of severity. It has become the highest leading reason for any type of intellectual disability.
Sucks. It sucks. I mean, my personal opinion is that when you're a kid, you're like, the world is like built on sugar, and when you're an adult, it's built on alcohol. And so I can see people when they're stressed and they're drinking, and yeah, I get it. And he was drug exposed. And so I get it when people are like, they don't cope, or they don't have the skills, or they're in denial or whatever. But it's something that can be avoided, that can cause a person, a child, lifelong set of struggles. It just gets to me. I'm like, I understand, like it said, like if you were exposed to a heavy metal or a toxin, or you were stressed, or you were getting beat up or something like that, and your child was, had those exposures, that's one thing. But something that you can avoid doing,
Can I comment on that?
please.
Because I disagree. I will just get vulnerable because it was going to come up at some point in this, but I'm an alcoholic and an addict, and I am recovered, and
Good to hear
my
it.
dad was an alcoholic as well. And it is not something that is controllable. And it's
Well,
basically
Can I ask you about, if you were pregnant, how would you handle it?
yeah. So if I was currently using and I didn't have like an AA program and stuff, I have no control over whether I use or not. Basically, the way that they explain it is like, you have this disease, basically like cancer, and your head tells you like, how do I even explain this? You have a disease like cancer that as soon as you put this thing in you, you cannot stop, and you cannot determine whether you're going to be able to stop or not. Like some days I was able to not do it. Other days you lose all control as soon as that thing is in you, that substance or whatever it is. And so when people are like, especially alcoholics, and they're pregnant, like you may try to, but there's something in us that as soon as that like alcohol hits our bloodstream, or that drug, flicks this switch on that just sends you out of control. So unless you're working like a program, or you find God, or whatever it is, you find something to basically to cope. Like you need these coping skills, and for me, it was the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous that brought me to like getting over all these traumas and stuff like that, and finding something that was bigger than me, that didn't that I wasn't in control anymore. I gave my life up to something in control that is not me. And so, yeah, it's really sad.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And again, we adopted Peyton at birth. out of San Bernardino and he was drug exposed.
Mhm.
So to me, I understand when people do what they do. I get that. And I didn't mean to discount your experience
No, it's okay.
whatsoever. It's just that I can tell you, you don't know like what you just described and how that like affects and it's just so it's just a mind-blowing thing to see. Like there's my struggles and then there's
Yeah.
somebody else's struggles.
And that's the hardest thing about like society. Like it's the same things as all these disabilities and all these special needs and stuff. Like it's the same sort of thing. We don't know why we are the way that we are. Nobody knows. It's not like we have, books and pages of it where people understand, okay, this is how it works and this is how you solve it or try to help it. And it's not, it's this thing that like you don't understand unless you talk to somebody else who has it, and no normal person, like nobody who is not an alcoholic, like my mother, my brother, even like they will never understand how like our minds work, which is
You're
the
kind of
hardest part.
you're describing like my situation, but opposite. I'm the only child in my family without a DUI.
Mhm.
So like it just skipped me, but I live in that world. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I guess maybe I would have a different view on it if it was like a family member, because I do get it. But again, I adopted a stranger's baby. And so I
Yeah.
still have that little hiccup
Yeah.
of like, like,
How could you?
yeah, how could she do that at 40?
It's still, even us as alcoholics are like, we see our friend, like I see my friends like dying and stuff, and it's like, how can you do that after you already have, been sober this long and you've done this and you've done that? And it's like, that's the crazy thing about this, is that it's just you'll never understand.
And
why or how it works.
historically, alcohol wasn't bad during pregnancy. My mom drank
Mhm.
in her last trimester with me. I think I'm okay. And in different cultures, like in France, they drink every day.
Yeah.
It's like, just in moderation and things like that. And so alcohol is not the problem. It's not that. It's just, I just look at it like we have a child who has to live 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years of stuff that existed before they were even.
That was not even their fault. Yeah.
It's so wild. It is so wild. And I can tell you, I as a parent, and I see my son with impulse control disorder, and he's on a ton of medication, he will be self-medicating. He will be self-medicating at some point. So that is a bridge that I'm going to have to cross too. But I just look at it like, what can we do to make the situation better for children? And sometimes it's an easy answer, and a lot of times it's not. But again, this brings us to where intellectual disabilities come from. Sometimes you can clearly put the dots together, and sometimes it's absolute just mutations and just a blip of genetics, right? So again, here when we come to define things, we have the IDEA, U.S. Department of Education, and then American Association of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. There used to be an agency called the Association for Retarded Children, ARC. And I know these things because my dad's sister had Down syndrome. So I grew up in a family with a blood relative with Down syndrome. And so, it was almost like saying Goodwill, but it was ARC. And I think they kind of morphed into something else. And it also things like this UCP, United Cerebral Palsy, kind of took part of ARC in and things like that. So we'll talk more about agencies, but AAIDD breaks down the definition into certain things like limitations in present functioning, cultural and linguistic diversity, like again, limitations and often coexist with strengths. I wish they put that bullet first. An important purpose is describing limitations is to talk about a level of supports. Does this person need supports every day in every way, or just once a week, once a month, or just when it comes to paying bills, right? And so everybody's different, and putting together this profile really, really helps. And again, with appropriate supports, that person can have a very independent and high functioning life. And again, a lot of these people do live with family members for their whole life. And a lot of times they do live independent. We'll talk more about that. So again,
quick question.
Jump in.
For the two different terms, is the AAIDD more of like the environmental part of that?
So look at it, remember, IDEA.
Because I'm confused.
You're good. Put it this way. So IDEA is only concerned about school because it's U.S. Department of Education, right? And AAIDD looks at the whole person. and school is a part of that. Right? So if you, go ahead.
The second definition is more comprehensive.
Yes.
It says what's in the first definition. So they're both saying the same thing, just the second definition, it's over what's in the first definition.
Right. Because you and I, school is just a part of who you are. It's just not everything. Right. And how this person wakes up and gets dressed and pays bills and goes to work. IDEA just has nothing to do with that, right? IDEA is literally a child in a classroom. That is it. Nothing at home, no leisure activities, no anything outside the classroom only. So it's good to have, that's why I like there's more than one term, more than one definition, because one is looking at just school. The other one's looking at a whole presentation of a person. Does that make sense? Yes?
Yeah. And the other thing too, to kind of, I had a little remembrance of today in my own life is that, school, while we are looking at a child in education, we're also looking at a child with needs, and they have two different roles, because if you look at your life, or I look at my life, or specifically my kid's life, education plays about a 20-year role. An individual's life is hopefully, four times that.
Yeah.
And so that's actually the bigger definition we want. And so to use the right definition in the right lane of their life. So if they're in school, then you would default to that. But outside of school, which is a larger portion of a child or of a human, they're going to need that second definition.
So is that good, Cece? Two of those can be correct. One just has this scope and one has this scope. Yeah, cool. Good questions, because the book does that for every disability category. There's sometimes 4 or 5 definitions. And it really think about who runs these agencies. This one is education. This is like, we are in charge of your education. These people are like, we are in charge of helping you have a full and quality life. Right. So of course there are going to be more details here, which is good. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. And again, the definitions again, if we don't know if there's a true intellectual disability, the first term we would use is developmental disability. That would capture everything from walking late, talking late, not pointing, not communicating, not keeping up, anything like that. So developmental disability could be anything until we really clearly identify. What else? What are some other terms that you might use, Alicia, in your program?
I think missing milestones. If you've just missed your milestones, your pediatrician asks you that all the time when you take in a fairly young child, any missed milestones. So developmental delay is what we would use in the business.
Yeah. And then this also says, kind of hints at, you might have a cognitive disability, but there all might be other things present, like a physical disability as well. And again,
and two, as you move forward, if there is a clear medical diagnosis, and she'll talk about this like Down syndrome, that if you have Down syndrome, you are clearly walking with a big umbrella, and in that umbrella will be an intellectual disability. So then you wouldn't say developmental delay. You would say, a child with Down syndrome. That then as a teacher, it would be your responsibility to understand that there may be some physical impairments, some, definitely some intellectual some impairments, as well as some medical impairments. Right. So give the name if you know the name. If we
right. So yeah. So if you say, if you're not quite sure, a nice catch-all is developmental disabilities or missed milestones, and then you're trying to like gather more of that data, so then a doctor can make a diagnosis, or we can clearly identify a child. But right. If a child has a genetic marker like Down syndrome, then you kind of, like she's saying, you kind of know it's not just one thing. It's not just like, like if I was born with like a missing arm,
right,
that might be my one thing. Right. I could also have ADHD and whatever, but that could be my one thing. And that'd be clearly my limitations, or I need accommodations and modifications in that regard. But when you say Down syndrome, it could be a handful of things in addition to that. So under that umbrella, like she said, it's really interesting, because again, once you talk about one disability category and you say, oh, I know somebody with ID, an intellectual disability, they're going to be completely different than somebody else with ID. Again, there's this old phrase, and it says, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. The same thing applies to intellectual disabilities. If you've met somebody with ID, you've met one person with ID, because they're so different, it's hard to even group people together. Just remember, this class is about how we support children in a classroom primarily, but I like to talk about it in a very expansive way. But primarily we're talking about classroom, but then there are some life skills involved here.
And that was the same thing when we were in last week's chapter with LDs.
Mhm.
You know, if you've met one person with dyslexia, does not mean that the second person with dyslexia struggles with the same language impairment. So what is consistent is that nothing is consistent in this world.
Yeah.
And yet you put them into a classroom, and your job will be to move all of them forward, God willing. Like, that's
in as a supportive way as possible. And that can look different on different days too. Even if you have a student with Down syndrome and you have all these, you know, like a list of their limitations, guess what? There could be some new ones, or some old ones could resolve themselves. And so again, even a child with a clear diagnosis, it was going to present differently on different days. Even a typically developed child is going to present differently on different days. And so, yeah, it's like Christmas morning every morning, right?
It's a big job.
That's what I tell people. That's what I tell people. So again, then we talk about key 3 areas of concern. Now, adaptive behavior is a way of, I think adaptive behavior, I like to think of it as like functional coping. If you're terrible at something, you're going to figure out a way to work around that and get your goals met. So like, I mean, this, I don't mean to sound pejorative, but again, I shared last week that I do have like a little brain hiccups here and there. And, but I tell people like I'm pretty good artistically. I have like awards for art and stuff like that, but there's certain things that I haven't mastered yet. And let's say, for example, this seems really like a kind of a silly analogy, but I'm just gonna throw it there. So yeah, I have awards for sculpture. You know, I'm an eco artist in my free time if I have any. But I can't use a sewing machine. Like, and I'm saying that knowing full well I could do that later in life. That's fine. But I've broken sewing machines and I made them smoke. Like I broke. So I look at it this way: if I really want to sew something, I'm just going to figure out a way to do it. I'm going to use glue, I'm going to use tape, or I'm going to hand sew that thing, right? So adaptive behaviors is like, I have a goal, I'm going to get that thing, I'm going to get that goal met, but how am I going to do it might be super creative based on my own limitations. This, on a typically developed child, this is when you see a kid who sees a cookie jar way up there and they're going to stack 14 different things, totally dangerous, to get that cookie jar up there. It's the same thing for people with intellectual disabilities. Sometimes we have to identify what those supports look like for them, so they are obviously safe and structured and whatnot. But again, there's these 3 areas: conceptual, social, and practical. A lot of times people with intellectual disability don't understand things that are invisible, like integrity, honesty, people being possibly getting manipulated. So it's hard to describe these things to somebody when their brain is just not, they just haven't developed the capacity to understand the things. Social things like making friends, keeping friends, hobbies, leisure activity, and then practical skills like cooking, making and doing laundry, getting dressed, cleaning a bathroom or a kitchen, or, you know, not answering the door to every stranger, or if, you know, like, are they able to cook safely, or how do they call for help? But so it's really kind of interesting because some people need supports on all of these, and some people need just a little bit. So again, we have to figure out what that person needs. And again, when we talk about adaptive behavior in the little kids, what does adaptive behavior look like at your school? Like if you're like, oh, I know there's a limitation, but they're trying to get through it. They're trying to like get their goals met without having all the skills. Do you know what maybe I'm not describing that well.
No, I get it. We're all creatures of adaptive. Like some tests call it daily living. So if I'm looking at a 2-year-old, I'm looking at potty training as adaptive living. If I'm looking at a 5-year-old, I'm looking at his cleaning up skills. If I'm looking at a 16-year-old, I'm looking at as driving skills. If I'm looking at you guys, I'm looking at as, you know, paying your rent on time.
Management.
Right. So this adaptive behavior, if I'm looking at my life, it's laundry and dishwasher. It's so
every day.
every single person has to figure out adaptive behavior. No matter what, we just have more problem solving skills to do it. Others just need some support. But adaptive behavior is something forever we will all do. An 80-year-old has to figure out how to do less, and that is an adaptive issue. So adaptive behavior is for all of us. Another term for it you call is daily living. Writing a check is no longer something you would teach Venmo or banking, or I mean these, but it is just your living, and that it's a lot like social skills in the terms of what's expected of a 2-year-old is not expected of a 22-year-old. And it's the same thing with adaptive living. What's expected of a 2-year-old is different than what's expected of you, but you still must have the skills.
You know what, and we haven't got to the autism chapter yet, but there is a show on Netflix, and it's called is it Love on the Spectrum?
We talked about that.
Yeah.
We put that on our list. Yeah.
So Love on the Spectrum is great because you see a lot of these grown adults with autism still living at home, or living in like an apartment off the side of the property, or they live independently, and you can see where they're like, well, this is important and I need to do this, and they've learned it over the years, or they have a big gap in that area and they have people helping them to do it. So that kind of puts things together. So my aunt, her IQ was 55-ish. And so she kind of had the acuity of maybe like a 6-year-old, but she was also super sassafras. And so she, born in the 60s, was raised in a group home because that was normal at the time. You have a child with Down syndrome and you never went home with your own child, right? But she lived in a group home. She was able to do a lot of her daily living skills. She had a job at Big Lots where she put price tags on cans. She was in the Special Olympics for bowling. She had very marginal verbal skills, and she had a full set of dentures by the time she was 20. So a lot of speech and language challenges, but you know, in your family, you kind of like could hear it. It's like your culture, you know. But it was interesting because there was, we call it, well, my maiden name is Mertzweiler. So it'd be like, oh, she's Mertzweiler through and through, like red hair and super sassy. And, you know, she was stubborn and she had a temper. And then there was a lot of cultural pieces there where people were like, oh, well, if you have a low IQ, you should just be a sweet little doll and never get mad and never come on to another boy. Like, so there was a lot of like normal, like animal, like human things that I remember growing up, seeing the adults dealing with this and being like, well, she just wanted another piece of cheesecake. What's the big deal? But knowing now, what I know is that there's also large organ failure sometimes, and there's like diabetes and all kinds of different things that come with some of these things. So again, looking at the whole person, you could see, well, she was great in this area and not so great in this area, and she needed help here and she didn't need any help here. The best part is like I learned what regional center was very, very early. As in having so when you're identified really early with having Down syndrome, regional centers almost like, it's like an agency that kind of helps coordinate. It's almost like I call it like a lifelong IFSP. It's almost like your educational piece and your family piece and your legal piece and your support system. So there's a lot of things go together. They kind of keep all these in mind, this conceptual, social, and practical pieces. And they can have day programs, and they can have job coaches, and they can have social workers and blah, blah, all kinds of stuff. And I do remember when there was like, you know, she was doing well. And I do remember when she wasn't doing well, and how sometimes she would be over medicated and things like that. So it just like certain things that there's a lot of cultural saturation here. And so it's, as you go forward in your career, you'll learn more about people like this. But again, if you're going to stay working with the little ones, you won't see, like, we won't be talking about money concepts with 3-year-olds, right? To them, it's a piece of green paper or a coin, right? Don't put it in your mouth. That's pretty much it, right?
But you will spend the entire time in the bathroom.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
But again, on this thing, a 2-year-old, you're going to talk about maybe, you know, you're not going to really say follow the rules, but getting them to learn how to follow the rules.
Right.
Right. Or, you know, because that's a precursor to obeying a law.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah, you don't tell a 2-year-old, let's help you avoid victimization, but you can teach a 2-year-old how to say, no, my turn.
Correct.
right?
Right.
So all these pieces, they have like the entry level, and then they start to work themselves up based on the need of the child or the student or the person. So yeah, I look at this as like, if we all kind of started here and then worked up from here, then we would all again have the same playing field, right? So we always talk about independence here. We don't want people to be dependent on anybody else. We want people to have the dignity of risk. We want people to be able to have a life. My auntie, she liked beer. And if she was on a new job place and she saw that there was a corner bar, she would leave the big lots and go to the bar. So I'm telling you, I'm like 15 years old seeing this hullabaloo. And my dad's a cop too. So he has to go pick his sister up with Down syndrome at this bar where she's hanging out with a homeless dude. Yeah, it was like, I'm telling you, that's when I say she's all Mertzweiler, like the sassafras ran deep and wide. It runs deep and wide in my family. And so, yeah, it was like, she had more access to alcohol. Yeah, she would have been another one of the, on that end of the gene pool. But it's just, it really kind of interesting. So we wanted her to be as independent as possible, but sometimes a little bit too much independence. She was like, I'm out of here, it was the bar, the corner bar and the donut shop. It was that one. And then we called her, like, she has red hair, but all she wants to eat is white food. It was mashed potatoes, buttered noodles and donuts. Like that's, and there's this thing where you're just like, oh, like you want to let them, but then that's not good. So we do. So the shared definition is having an IQ below 70. That would be considered a mild form of intellectual disability. And you will see, if you end up working in like a K-12 classroom, the kids who, remember we talked about MTSS and RTI and all those multi-tiered systems of supports, the kids who technically need more and more supports, that is sometimes the first way that you're cluing into the fact there might be a mild intellectual disability. Now, again, kids can graduate high school with an intellectual like IQ between 70 and 80 with the right supports. And so again, we don't always know what we're dealing with until we go further down the educational pipeline. And again, then we talk about moderate, and then we talk about severe. I've worked with kids in their home with like IQs of like 30, 40. And so this is kind of like a nice little way to look at it. Again, the average IQ, or the mean, if we took everybody on the planet and gave them all the standardized tests, put all those scores on a bell curve, it would look like this. Most of the people are in the middle. Very few people are way out here. So when we're going up here, Einstein 160, who's the guy in the wheelchair? 170.
Oh, he recently died.
Yes.
Stephen
Hawking's. Yes. Yeah. Gina Davis 150, by the way. So low genius is considered 140. But again, out here, you're going to get, sometimes you'll get kids in the autism spectrum disorders up here, like genius, super genius. And then down in here, you're going to have, again, this cutoff right under 70, this is where the definition begins. So when you hear say 2 standard deviation, that just means a score of 15 points as you go down the scale. So I see as you go down the scale, it's less people, right? So every 15 points is 1 standard deviation. Every time you go down 15 points, it's less people. So there's less people between 70 and 85 than there are between 85 and 100. See that? Because this is the line where the people are. So when you get down here into 55, 40, 25, people right here, it says right here, this is a nice way of saying mental impairment, but people with a 0 to 25 are sometimes confined to a hospital bed their whole life. Or they don't live that very long, right? Between 25 and 40, you can have a nonverbal, very happy child who's very, 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 very delayed, but like smiles all the time and doesn't really communicate. And when they want to, they're not getting their way, they will bite you. I worked with those. You can also have, again, this range here, but again, starting at 70 and going below. And by the way, the average IQ it takes to pass the driver's test the first time is about 80. So that tells you why people like we should be defensive drivers, right? So it averages somewhere between 90 and 100, so a little bit I'm sorry, 10 under and 10 above. So like between 90, this should say 110. But then there's high average and then severe. So this is kind of where my kid's high average, which is great. Again, I tell him it doesn't matter how smart you are, it's what you do with it. Like a smart, I tell him, a smart guy, because he always said, I'm making my own apartment. You can't tell me to clean my apartment. I said, but that's not a smart guy. Because a smart guy, if you want a boyfriend or a girlfriend over there, you're gonna have a clean apartment. Like, right? And so it's not, again, it's not about the IQ that you have, it's what you do with it, right? So okay, most people who are identified with intellectual disabilities are way up at the top here, way up at the top. So out of these three categories, mild is the biggest one. So when we learned about Lori at the beginning, Lori's mild, right? And again, this profound piece, this right here, limitations in self-care. Continence means that they have to wear a diaper. Communication, most of the time they aren't communicative. This is a lot of times children who are born with spina bifida, or maybe somebody who's been in a car accident, and we'll learn about TBI in the last chapter. Again, continuous and intensive supports, this usually means a hospital bed, maybe in a hospital or outside of a hospital or in some sort of home. Yeah, so there's a big range even in this small side of the range. So again, this kind of tells us right here, it's people with a mild intellectual disability, they can get up to about the 6th grade. And quite frankly, most media, newspapers, magazines are only written up to maybe 8th grade tops. So people can be very functional with this type of intellectual disability. They can have a job, they can read bus schedules, they can pick up the phone, they can call in prescriptions and things like that. It's just about building a skill like riding a bike or tying your shoe, things like that. So again, out of all the intellectually disabled population, about 85% of that section is mild. So something you wouldn't even see, something that you wouldn't even notice. Again, if you have a friend with ID and you're not sitting in a classroom doing math, you're not going to see that unless they are constantly doing something else, like forgetting their wallet somewhere or letting a stranger borrow their cell phone, like those pieces of invisible social skills. You might have a friend who has a gap in those. That could be, but again, we're not diagnosing our friends. We're not even categorizing them yet. And again, mild, the most common. That's like on the quiz, on the test. You guys got that. Major causes: genetic, hereditary, kids who are born early, low birth weight, exposure to toxins, diseases, child abuse, neglect. Not a big surprise when a child, there were studies done in the 60s, and I think I did put, maybe not in here, but in 107, I put the SPIT studies. They're on YouTube, where they took Romanian orphanages and they tested out attention, giving infants attention or not, withholding attention. And they would withhold the attention for a day or 2 days or 3 days or 4 days or 5 days or a week or 2 weeks or a month or 2 months or 3 months. And at the end of just 30 days, you would have somebody come in and they would be fed and they would be given food, but they were never held and touched and played with. And their IQ can drop up to 30 points. And at the end of 30 days, when a person walks in to bring them food, they don't even lift their head off the mattress. In 30 days, you can literally take a human who could have had an average IQ of 100 and given them intellectual disability.
That's like what happened with us and that kid that's on the spectrum. Cece wasn't here, but he has autism. Well, we know that he has autism or he's on the spectrum, but he's not officially diagnosed. And the mom, within like a month of the mom paying attention to him, he came back and was talking. He's trying to listen. He's sitting on the carpet. He's like, he identified the letters and numbers before any of the other kids in class, and like whole different person from 1 month of the parent just paying attention.
Yeah, and there's kind of like an energetic explanation to that. It's like what you put your energy into, it expands. Children are no different. Same thing with people with a low IQ. If you really like push yourself, you can expand your limited knowledge on something. When's the last time you learned something new? This could be it. You're expanding your knowledge on something like this. IQ usually itself doesn't really change more than 3 to 5 up plus or minus, but 30% based on neglect, that's, or not 30%, 30 points. That's huge. What if that particular child was going to, I don't know, invent something, and now they, It's wild. So there are some prevalences here in the causes here. Fragile X syndrome is a genetic issue. Do you guys remember what your chromosomes look like? They look like, when we look at them on a map, they kind of look like an X. I'm gonna draw a picture right now. They kind of look like an X. There's a little piece, I'm not sure if I can see it here. There's a little piece of particular chromosomes that are literally fragile. It's like a broken piece of your chromosome, and it is a mutation. It's not something that you can give a child. It's not something that you can catch from the air. It's not like COVID. It's nothing like that. It's just a genetic mutation where when the chromosomes were replicating, they just didn't do a good job. It was like your copying machine broken. You broke. And so Fragile X will present as more of a medically fragile child. It might have some autistic like features, excuse me. And then, but it is clearly a genetic marker, whereas autism has no genetic marker. You can't take a blood test for autism. You can take a blood test for Fragile X. They have some similar features, but one clearly has genetic marker, one does not. Down syndrome does have a genetic marker. They actually have a extra chromosome. So that's why it's called trisomy. Instead of having 23 pairs of chromosomes, they have 23 plus 1. It's pretty interesting, extra. And by the way, there's other genetic stuff where people have 2 extra chromosomes or are missing 1. Yeah, so interesting. And then there's fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. Again, we call it a spectrum too, because it could look certain things in certain ways. Again, with my son having some features of that, a lot of his stuff can be more attributed to maybe being exposed. We have some ideas that it was more like oxytocin, Oxycontin that he was exposed to. And what are the researchers out there? You know, what research do we have on that? We have research on like alcohol in children and smoking in children and maybe marijuana in children, but we don't have like, hey, are you on oxy and pregnant? Like, we don't research that. It's technically, it's unethical. So we have an idea of what it could be. And then here, did we cover it all? Yeah, we do. Right. So again, ID could also show up after a head injury, but that is kind of carved out into a different chapter. So you could have, I mean, we all have a story that maybe when I went to school with somebody and after spring break, they came back after a skiing accident or car accident or a boating accident and had all the stitches and stuff like that. And they came back and they had to learn how to walk and talk. Same thing, that it wouldn't technically be called intellectual disability over TBI, traumatic brain injury, but they look very similar at that stage. They look like learning how to walk and talk and things like that. And again, the category of IDEA is important to a certain degree, but really just getting the right supports for the student under either category is equally as important. Let's see, characteristics. Let's see, characteristics. Again, we talked about cognition, and cognition is the same thing as IQ. And then adaptive behavior. Let's see. Needs for supports. Let's see. I'm trying to get here to the stuff that's super duper important because it's already 8 o'clock. Let's see. Okay. Can you guys hear that? Because I have somebody standing outside my door. No. Okay, good. So again, now where do we educate people with intellectual disabilities? Typically in the gen ed classroom. Typically in the gen ed classroom. Remember, why that's where you have those MTSS, of systems of supports, where we can give those global prompts and then give the next level of prompts and then get a smaller group to have, and then maybe carve out or have a push in. It's way better to have them with their typical peers as much as humanly possible, right? Least restrictive environment. Now, this one right here, this is what they were saying is that this is general education with intellectual disabilities. We have them in the gen ed class, but they're not equally represented. If this blue line is all the disabilities and this green line is intellectual disabilities, it went up and down and up, and it's coming up a little bit. Now it's kind of plateauing. And for something that has been almost the most common since technically the institutionalization in the 70s, we have this number is not going up. So do you guys remember have anybody like at your school with Down syndrome in any grade? You do? Cece, you had anybody on campus?
Yes, we do.
Did you no, like when you were in school?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so was it a separate classroom or were they kind of trickled in?
They were trickled in. I was at like the table with, they always, of course we're inclusive, but they will put them like in the center of the table. And because I was not necessarily the class clown, but I like to talk or laugh at everything, they will always put, most of them with me or like other friends that I had as well.
Oh, you mean language rich environment?
Mhm.
You were the language rich.
Mhm.
And that's a natural pairing for teachers to do that. Oh, let's get super chatty CC with the kids who don't understand. That's great. And you both probably learn from each other. The reason I asked is that I'm telling you, watching my son go through school, I saw maybe one kid here, and it was like in the early grades where they're testing out the least restrictive environment. Now, trust me, if they cannot effectively be educated and keep up with supports in the least restrictive environment or the gen ed classroom, yes, let's move them on to a specialized classroom or a partial specialized classroom. A lot of students are in an 80% specialized classroom and maybe 20% they matriculate, or vice versa. They'll go 20% in a specialized classroom and 80% in the gen ed classroom. It just kind of depends on what the student needs. But I was surprised that I thought, my culture includes Down syndrome. I was like, oh, these people are everywhere. So let's just work them all in. And they're not you're going to see more kids with autism or learning disabilities or even speech and language in a gen ed classroom than you will see somebody with Down syndrome. Now, somebody with mild intellectual functioning, you might see more commonly in a gen ed classroom. And again, here, this is where we educate them here. So separate class, right? So this is coming down. So we don't want to separate them because remember, least restrictive environment means put them with their peers. A resource room sometimes is like the classroom between the classrooms, right? Or they do 20% of their day there, or they do 80% of their day there. A separate school. Now, again, Peyton's at a separate school for autism. And it will look something like this, but in a different chapter. But look at that's coming down. Separate school means least restrictive is going up. They're putting them in with the gen ed. And like this regular classroom is going up, which is good. Plus, think about it, not just good for the student with the intellectual disability, but good for the rest of the students who understand inclusion, acceptance, all those pieces that create a good human being. Yeah, that's a good thing. It's a good thing. Challenges and solutions. Well, I'm going to go right here to the pictures. I like these. It's all in together. The book has it like here, and then a couple of pages later, you're like that. No, I put it next to it. Right. Intellectual disabilities, right? We talked about the general characteristics and the challenges, right? I did work with a client who had a stroke. He was an older gentleman. He wasn't even that older. I mean, he was like maybe mid 40s, and he had a stroke, an HIV related stroke. And he went from owning a business and driving in a Mercedes to moving in with his parents in a retirement community because he lost the ability to speak, right? And so there's so we had to work on functional skills, how to make macaroni and cheese and how to answer the phone and how to things like that. But he wasn't able to do, he had tend to have a very apraxic, so he had basically 12 words out of his whole language. And most of those, he would express himself in donut. So I'd be like, hey, how's it going? How's your day? He'd be like, donut. Like, oh, are you hungry? Do you want a donut? He's like, well, donut and then donut. So the brain does interesting things when you have strokes. And it wasn't, so we would call that a TBI, but you could have students with very limited functional communication. And so again, we need some supports there to get them in a safe, independent environment, right? So again, general characteristics, challenges, solutions, networks of supports. It's called It Takes a Village. Family members. A lot of times the family members are doing all the business. Yeah. Friends, peers, coworkers, volunteers, and social service agencies. Jump in.
No.
I thought I heard a squeak.
No, that's my son. Yes. Yeah.
And that's why I'm at work.
Thank you.
And that's why I'm at work and not at home, because I was lecturing last night. I guess lecturing last night, and it was on autism. And so I let Peyton come in and out, but he's like, I don't want to talk anymore. And he shut the door, and then he'd be talking through the door. Like, I'm going to work. That's why I lecture from campus. Again, so we talk about the levels of supports. And I can tell you right now in the 110 class, we talk about agencies out in the community. There are so many types of supports. Again, we talked about regional center. Goodwill Industries, Easter Seals, Best Buddies right here. This last name Shriver, this is a big family who actually started the Special Olympics. So it's like the Kennedys, kind of like John F. Kennedy, his family, and the Shrivers are kind of like that family. Very big on helping the less fortunate. So this Best Buddies is like a part of that as well. Special Olympics. And yeah, here's Best Buddies. And then this, again, you see maybe some Down syndrome here, but some mild features, right? Again, you'll see with Down syndrome, a lot of students who look very similar, whether you have a person with Down syndrome from China or a person from Down syndrome from Ecuador, very similar phenotype. The wide set hooded eyes, very stocky, very thick. They have heavier bone density, simian crease across here, a lot of speech and language delays, thicker skin, ruddy hair, ruddy skin, thicker hair. But having a peer, listen, this guy right here went home and said, I have this cool buddy that helped me read my book today, and he was wearing bracelets and he had cool hair. That's a huge deal. That is a huge deal to a young man. Being around this guy who he went, like a lot of times the intellectual disability, they don't really understand their intellectual disability. They just want to be like everybody else. And so we give them that dignity of having supports or dignity of risk, right? Here's like Special Olympics. Yeah, it was really kind of cool to see my auntie like get her medals and bowling and whatnot. And so it's just really kind of cool to see people who just want to be like everybody else. Notice I'm not saying normal, because who's normal? I am not normal. Who's normal? Nobody's normal. Again, so accommodations. Now let's say you're in your classroom and you're in your daily environment, you're working with the kiddos. It really depends on what they need, right? The first thing we do is we check eyes and ears, like everything. Again, my auntie wore glasses. Some of them have like, they wear hearing aids. And again, as they get older, they're going to have like age-related decline on some of their organs and things like that. And eyes and glasses are pretty common. So again, you might have to have somebody who's a one-on-one aide that helps them through the day. Sometimes you just have to have somebody who breaks the tasks into pieces. Now, again, if they're in a specialized classroom or specialized school, it might be set up that way. Again, simplify. As a teacher, you really look at what you're measuring. What are you looking for? Are you looking for perfection? Or are you looking for growth? The answer is growth, because nobody's perfect, right? You're looking for a skill that's being built. You're looking for somebody who's becoming a better version of themselves, right? And yes, schools like to measure everything sideways, but at the same time, if you get a child who clicks into something new and it expands their whole world, and maybe they didn't measure that great on a test, I think we're all gonna live, I promise. So again, you might have somebody who takes notes for them. I literally have a student this semester who has a rare genetic disorder, and she knows she's doing great. Her mom has tried to contact me several times, and I said, well, the student's an adult. She's like, but I have power of attorney. I understand power of attorney is different than an educational career. The student, she's doing just fine. She types fine, even her handwriting is okay. She laughs at my jokes. She's doing great. Right? My thumbs up, you're doing great. Right? And her mom's like, we didn't know anybody else with this rare genetic disorder until we met the 27 other people on the planet. So it's an interesting thing. And again, I was like, how do I support? I don't say, what's your disability and what do you need? I say, how can I support you? And trust me, some weeks are great, some weeks are not great. But that is the same thing for everybody, right? And sometimes they need extended time and breaks. They need to have reminders. They need to have mnemonics. They need to have songs. They need to have things in color. My auntie, even though she had a pretty interesting level of intellectual disability, she could memorize stuff like your birthday. She would meet you once and lock it down forever. Lock it down forever. And she would tell me, oh, do you remember your friend in Girl Scouts? Like when I was 10, yeah, her birthday is this day. Any song, any Disney song, any Disney movie, memorized. Couldn't do math, couldn't tie a shoe, but she would lock it down. There's certain things, they have skills. They have skills, right? And again, some other supports or some other things to keep in mind. If we're expecting a person with intellectual disability or somebody with Down syndrome to pass like trigonometry, that's our problem. That's not appropriate. That is not appropriate, right? I don't think I could do it anymore.
I can do it.
I'm like, like mine's plotting. He's plotting lines and giving me linear functions. And I was like, I just sat back and said, teach me how to do that. Cause I'm like, oh, I forgot. And he's like, yeah, mom, it's a linear function. I'm like, I'm good. I'm good. I knew it once. I don't need to know it now. But here's the thing. What are we measuring and why? What are we measuring and why? And we will learn about community-based instruction. So we're teaching kids a little bit more like how to just be a human being. But again, that comes with a little bit older kids. We don't take 2-year-olds out to Target and say, here, make change for a 10. We don't do that. It has to be developmentally appropriate. But again, so like Alicia, what are you trying to measure? Like, what are you trying to identify? What are some of the data sets that you're looking at?
Well, if you're talking about community, you're typically talking about, can they go play soccer in a group on a field? Can we go play t-ball? That would be a community resource. How about
what about your little one? What about your little ones? If you suspect there may be a developmental or missed milestone, what are you trying to measure to almost like prove? Like, what kind of data are you looking for? That kind
I'm
of
going to take a standardized test, and I'm going to look at cognition, expressive, receptive, social, adaptive. I'm going to look at those 6 areas, and then fine and gross motor together, 7. I'm going to look at those and I'm standardize them and see how far they're off.
Mhm.
And then I'm going to look at eligibility versus can I fund them? Because the regional center determines funding. And then I'm going to see how much we can do. So let's say a child, I mean, this happens a lot. Let's say a child with fetal alcohol syndrome, is going to have some struggles. However, they're not eligible for services because they are not 2 standard deviations below.
They're not disabled enough.
Yeah, they have language, they have socialization, they walk,
They talk.
they are socially, they're somewhat impaired a little bit, but they're not 2 standard deviations below. So I'm going to assess this child and I'm going to say, okay, mom, he's not eligible for services. He does not meet the standards for the state to take the federal money and say, we'll apply it to this child because they are eligible. They present with a 50% delay or a 30% delay. So then I'm going to say, here are your resources. And so you're going to go to a mommy. You're going to go to a family support system through the regional center. So I'm going to look at community resources that are free that California already funds for this in the middle kind of group.
Yeah. And same thing, like you wouldn't see a learning disability at this age, but as a child gets older, again, they could like get up there and just not be disabled enough. That's what we were talking about last week. It's like dyslexia sometimes just not give them enough to get enough.
Right.
And then at that point, then it's advocacy and mama bear.
And that's probably, guys, a lot of people you get your hands on, a lot of kids in your natural preschools. So you have moms and dads that want to put their kids in preschools for whatever reason. And so they go into your class and you start to see the water kind of stifle it. And you're going to say like, okay, I'm going to put this kid in this group and this kid in this group. And in time, you're going to see, okay, something's not clicking with this particular child. And yet there isn't a big enough delay to warrant extra services that says, okay, there's this pot of money waiting to help or accommodate this child. So then what? And that's when you're like, I want to help this kid. They're totally capable. But the one thing that none of these chapters talk about, which drives me insane, is natural drive. Natural drive is unmeasurable. And it changes every human being. Their natural characteristics that have nothing to do with autism, Down syndrome. You can have 2 autistic children and one naturally does more. One naturally wants more. And then all of a sudden they need less. And so those are the kids you have. And so finding your community resources makes you a better advocate for the parent and the child. There, every regional center, we have 25 different regional centers in the state of Orange, or in the state of California. We have regional center of Orange County. They have a family support network.
It's free.
So it's absolutely free. And they offer parenting classes almost nightly for potty training, for anything. I mean, anything you can imagine. So that would become your best friend. You would seek out resources from there. But those are the groups.
It's really not too far from here. I live in between the college and the regional center. So if you took a long street down and you took Newport Boulevard all the way till it hit 17th Street, took 17th Street, go over the 55. There's like a Mimi's Cafe right there.
It's right on the
Go
corner.
over the 555 and make your first left, that's the regional center. It's like right there. It's like right there. And so it's a great, like, I mean, I've walked in there and like been like pamphlet, like
Absolutely.
like, yeah, and they're like, take it all. Like,
No, it's all free resources. Kathleen McFarland runs the family support group. She will go out to any program. If you had your preschool program and you wanted to have an education night for parents, she would come out and talk to you about biting behavior. I mean, so it's a great resource. They get their money from the government. There is pots for this. And so they get their money from the government to help these groups of families, the families that don't get the actual direct services from regional center, but without these supports may get special ed, which is more costly than going to a feeding program through the regional center or through the family support group for free.
And you know what we haven't talked about, and I'm wondering if they're going to start the next wave of books are going to include like some of the initial research on people not being able to have or taking their children out of preschool programs and seeing this little area of delay increase because of COVID. What Alicia's saying is that you guys might see these kids who kind of fall a little bit into the cracks. This crack is getting bigger and there's more kids in it. Can you imagine learning how to speak from your peers with a mask on for the last 2 years, year and a half? How does that affect a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old? We don't know. We don't know yet. They didn't take data 100 years ago when it was happening 100 years ago. We do not know yet. So you guys, again, for you guys being here, and even if you're watching this recording, you guys are like on the cusp. You're the front runner. You guys are like the ones who are poised and open. And now you know this stuff. You can't not know it, but you're the people who need to know it because it's coming down the pipe. And these really, honestly, remember, the kids are doing the best they can. If they didn't have exposure to peers for a year and a half, or they had exposure to peers and it was like this, right? Or their environment wasn't stimulated. They weren't in a language-rich environment. They were, watching like an iPad for the last year and a half. That doesn't mean that they are on par developmentally. Even a typically developed child with an average IQ, they may have a little bit kind of slip back a little just because of our society.
Pediatricians are now calling them COVID kids, which is not person-friendly language, but they do have a title. Like we have seen language and narrative saying, just a victim of COVID.
Right. And so, I mean, again, speaking of language, you may hear some other slurs for this category of, I've heard professionals use this term, the shady 80s. Not okay. It's basically saying, the shady 80s or COVID kids, or when I was in school, we used to call it a slow learner. That's still not a really nice way to say. I mean, I was taught that you would say a learner who's earlier in their learning journey. They're just new to the learning journey. And then there's children or students who are more advanced in their learning journey. But it doesn't mean that one's smarter than the next. One is just like a little bit, further down the pipe. But again, it's hard because again, most people know not to use the word retarded, right? But there's still these little trickle things like COVID kids. Really?
But it is a group of behaviors. It's a child who has a lot of anxiety. It's a child with social delay. It's a child with expressive delay.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine. I mean, I can't even, like I said, I couldn't imagine even being a teenager right now. Yeah. Or I was talking to the chair in my department today about when we're talking about just rolling out our assignments for Portfolium or this film piece where a lot of people are still struggling with just instructions that maybe 2 years or 3 years ago that would be totally fine. But that has to do with the last couple of years of people coming out of high school when the high school was like non-existent. There's a year and a half of skills, or almost 2 years now, of skills that weren't being built. My niece was one of those people who was in her senior year during that when COVID first hit. And they literally said, whatever grade you have now is what you're going to get in June. So did she keep trying? Nope. It's just like, boom, done. So you have had at least 6 months of skills that weren't being built between ages of 17 and 18. That's going to affect a generation. Same thing with kids between 3 and 4, or 2 and 3. It's like, I don't even know. So obviously early intervention, we're like early intervention parents, blah, blah, blah. The quicker you get in there, the more supports that you identify, the better the supports, the more consistent the supports are, the more you get your parents on your team, the more you can get this again, literally like almost holding this child, space for this child to give them an opportunity to be just like their peers. As much as we can do that is what we do that for. It's just, like, again, when people don't understand early intervention, I say, let's talk about it like it's manners. When did your parents teach you manners? Oh, before I could walk and talk. No kidding. Would you want to not teach manners to your children and start at 13 or start at 3? Try 3 months, right? Because you don't start at 13, it's not going to happen. Same thing with early intervention. You don't ever get the time back. So let's get it in there, right? Okay. Picture caption. Oh, high quality preschools. Alicia Fernandez, would you like to tell us why you have a high quality preschool and why parents would naturally select your facility?
My preschool is a little bit exceptional, but of course you want a rich environment. You want them to be learning all the time in every aspect, multidisciplinary, learning through paste on the floor and dirt on the tree and letters and numbers. And you just want language, you want pictures, you want visual, auditory, just rich.
Oh, speaking of that, I just ran across SAG-AFTRA. You know, it's the union for like actors. When the actors were out of work, they started sitting down and reading books. So
wow.
There's a whole YouTube channel that's SAG-AFTRA, but just like actors and actresses reading their favorite books.
Oh, cute.
And I was like, yeah, Chris Pine can read me a book in it. I was like, okay. That's how I found it. I was like, he was like on my side. And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, all right. And then you would see all these people like Lily Tomlin and, you know, and then it's in different languages and stuff. It's really, really cool. And I was like, okay, that's cool. Out of work actors, not just like boohooing about, you know, being out of work. It's like, do something about it. It's beautiful, beautiful. And there's been a huge upturn. That's been like a silver lining of COVID as well. There are more resources like that. There are more resources like that. By the way, John Lithgow doing his manatee, I'm a manatee book. Have you seen that one?
No.
Oh my God. John Lithgow wrote a book called I'm a Manatee.
Is it just perfect?
And it's a song with a full orchestra.
Oh, cute.
I'm manatee. I'm a manatee. I'm just as wrinkled as my granatee.
Oh.
Yeah. Like there's no difference between my face and my fanatee. Because I'm a manatee, that's me. It's so.
Oh, I'm gonna have to look it up.
Yeah, it's so great. And so the reason I brought that up is like music and books and reading. And yes, you want to get them into a book, you want to read to them, but you know, videos and music and instruments and drums and textures and smells and the whole business, right? You don't know what everything you do fires up the brain, but you don't know the one that they're gonna like glom on today, and tomorrow it's something else.
Right.
Tomorrow ever something else. And it's really, really cool to see kids like blossom. It's really, really sweet. Functional curriculum. So little ones, you're focusing on what? Toileting, compliance, maybe putting your backpack a certain way, following rules, doing a schedule.
Getting dressed,
doing the boards or the books or the shoes, all the ties and the locks and the fine motor skills, all that business, right? And then when you get in with older kids, functional curriculum, could be literally going out into the community or learning how to read a bus schedule, you know, getting a grocery list, learning how to cook stuff, like
using a microwave.
Yeah. So CBI, oh my gosh, my oven took a big, you know, my 1986 Magic Chef took a big dump. So we got a new oven. My kid's like, oh, I need to do this and I need to do that. I'm like, okay, cool. You're gonna have a messy apartment, but you're gonna eat well. So like I figure like it's functional communication, functional create. I will not go grocery shopping if he does not write the list. Right? He's not great at writing, so we practice. And and then I give him $20 and you may get what's on the list. And he's like, but I want this, I want this. I'm like, not on the list. Well, next I'm gonna write it on the list. Yeah, that's what I told you. It's not on the list. Mom, you don't need a list. You need a list, right? So again, functional curriculum is, can you read an exit sign to a door? Do you know who to go to ask for help? Do you know when to cross a street? Do you know when not to cross a street? Do you know who would be a safe stranger to talk to, who would not be a safe stranger to talk to? Do you know maybe how close to talk to people, how not close to talk to people? What are there some topics you shouldn't talk about? Right? So functional curriculum means like we're teaching them life skills or ADLs, daily living, skills of daily living. So again, a lot of times in our current level of functioning, their kids aren't gonna have to write a whole lot. Again, we're not writing checks anymore, right? But if we need to teach them how to use Venmo or PayPal or whatever, but also you can only use it if you got the money in there. I was literally writing a check for something for his school, like they're having a golf tournament or whatever, and I was writing a check. I mean, I could have done it electronically. And he's like, oh, well, how many checks do you have in that checkbook? I was like, oh, I don't know, about 30 left. He's like, cool, that's all the money, right? And I was like, oh, no. You can write lots of checks and have no money in there. So thankfully, I think checks fading out is a good deal because you can't use your ATM card if there ain't nothing in there. Transition, this talks about students who are going from high school to college or any sort of adult related activities. Again, depending on where the school is and what type of school they're at, they may have matriculation into colleges or they may have job coaches, right? And so it's really kind of interesting to see like who's doing what and where people are and what they want. So again, supported employment means like, hey, we might need your help, but where would you like to work? Well, I want to work at a restaurant. Well, they're not going to be the cook because they can't manage the fire and it's really fast paced, but they could maybe be a host, a hostess. They could be a busser, things like that. And I really encourage everybody to shoot for above what you think they can do, because I have seen high schools do this piece where all the kids in special ed are in charge of the recycling program on campus. And trust me, I'm a total hippie, born in the 70s, super duper recycler. I have a 40 bushel composter. I'm as hippie as they come, but I don't think a green program should be left to students who are identified with special needs. That does two things. It tells them that you do this, which is like one step above trash, which is not terrible because janitors do make some money. And number two, it tells your typically developed students that, ew, I don't do that, they do that. I think it kind of cements a difference instead of inclusion. So I get a little irritated when like Tesoro High School, like, oh, but we have this great recycling program for our kids with identified needs. It's like the rest of the kids are throwing their stuff on the ground and saying, well, they'll pick it up. So again, push to what you think they can do and ask them what they want to do. Some of them love bagging groceries. My auntie loved using the price tag gun. Man, she was like the fastest girl in the West. Fantastic. And she even like worked at a mini blind factory, and it was like all these different things that she could do, right? And so ask them what they want to do and help them get there, right? Don't be like, oh, you can't do that because you have an IQ of 78. Don't do that. They will surprise you, just like every single category. They will surprise you. Again, we have students here on college campuses with an intellectual disability who can do well with the right supports. We don't have IEPs as college professors, but we do get accommodation and modification letters. Extra time at a test, note taker, like whatever, study, whatever. There's a bunch of different modifications and accommodations that can happen for people with intellectual disabilities. Again, first slide, Lori got her degree in journalism. Not easy, okay. And again, supported employment is almost like you have a job coach. You have I was at IKEA the other day, and there was a guy like basically one-on-one with another guy, and it was kind of weird because the support, like the coach guy, he was kind of having a bad day, and he was kind of like rolling his eyes, and because the young person who was identified was moving kind of slow. But again, what are we going for here? Quantity or quality? And I literally
walked. Huge. Everybody moves slow through IKEA.
I literally walked up to the coach and I said, thank you for doing this type of work. And he was kind of taken back. He's like, oh, okay. Because he was just like, he was like having this little huffy moment. And I was like, I'm thinking the worker, because it's not easy work to like literally job shadow somebody at IKEA, man. That's going to get tiring or overwhelming or desolate. I get sweaty downstairs at IKEA. It's like, I feel like there's like all this stuff is like getting on me. Well, I'm out. But again, we don't have to go too far into origins and history. People with intellectual disabilities have been in our system since, and I don't mean system, I mean like our human system since humans were invented. But again, there were researchers that happened a long time ago. Look at 1844. It's again, the concept of intellectual disability is saying these people are different, but it's okay. Literally, they used to use the term the village idiot, the moron, things like that, or the retardate. And again, we've evolved as human species. And so thankfully, again, and what people don't say is like during the Holocaust, people who were identified as dumb or even mute, they were in with the rest of the trains with the other people. And so again, in our country too, we had people who were institutions until the late 70s, or not even the late 70s, the early 70s. And I tell people during my lifetime, people were locked away and the key thrown away. So again, if you haven't looked in like some of the first modules about the disgrace of Willowbrook, that'll worse than any like Halloween movie you can ever watch. So there is a timeline of how we've supported people with intellectual differences. And eugenics kind of came up again a few years ago. Eugenics is saying there's one pure bloodline, that you can't interrace, and if you have like, if somebody's not smart and beautiful and perfect, then that part of the bloodline needs to be eradicated. So there's always fringe people, just like their IQ has this curve. There's always fringe people out here who have crazy ideas like let's kill people under the IQ of 100. And then there's people out here that are going to be like us who like, let's help everybody. Let's be these people. Yeah. Right. Hopefully it'll be more towards the middle. Right. And again, intellectual disabilities are everywhere. And so it is back here. Normalization. It is normal. I remember when Peyton started going to that school for autism, he literally second day in the principal's office, all these people here are way more disabled than me. And I said, yeah, you're in the principal's office again. Because he's hyperverbal and a lot of kids were not. He's like, and sometimes they have like a blank look on their face, but they're still doing their stuff, and he's like, he's all vim and vigor, right? He's like, these people, so a lot of these guys are way more disabled than me. I'm like, and yeah, here we are. It's all relative, right? And so you don't know, again, when you see a person with their IQ, and it shouldn't matter. It really shouldn't matter. Let's see. Oh, lead, major toxin. Just put it this way. Flint, Michigan, it still has unusable drinking water. Look that up. I think I put that in the module. There is 0 amount of lead that is healthy for the human body. 0 amount of lead. Also, lead dishes led to the fall of the Roman Empire because they stopped being able to have children. 0 lead is okay for your body. 0. And there's people, the National Guard still gives out bottles of water every single day in Flint, Michigan. Because the politicians made a choice to use old lead pipes to save $100 a month. And you can't reverse the pipes, all their water, their groundwater, their soil, everything's dead forever. 40,000 babies born each year with symptoms of prenatal alcohol exposure and lead. There's more than just that, but I'm telling you. And now that we're finding, by the way, I don't want to get anybody super paranoid. Don't dive too deep on 5G internet networks. Don't go too far down that rabbit hole, because then you're going to be like, nah. Yeah. I one night I went down the rabbit hole and now I can't not know that stuff. And I learned a lot. I learned the difference between AM and FM and why. Put it this way, I'm just going to give you 2 sentences. If you can use Wi-Fi to pick up a signal, and a signal carries data, is that signal going around your body or is it going through your body? And by the way, 4G signals are about this long and 5G signals are about this long. So they're more efficient at going through your body. What does that do to sperm and eggs and ova and pregnancy? Oh, but we need a faster device. That's super important. Oh, God, sorry. I'm done because like, it's like, don't ever look up phrases on YouTube that says like, cats with 2 faces. Don't do that either. That's the same thing as 5G. Don't go down the rabbit hole because you're like, and then they're like, oh, 5G this, 5G. And I'm like, anyways, so eBuddies is like a Zoom agency for kids who can have like peers without having, it's almost like pre-COVID, COVID. And so now there's this whole thing, this Best Buddies, and then now it's eBuddies, and it's really, really kind of cool. So again, long and short of it is that intellectual disabilities are everywhere. Don't underestimate people. Don't treat people as less than. Look at them as what they need help with, just the same as you would like someone to help you with. So lots of stuff we went over today. But again, this is why I put chapter 9 out of order, because we had speech and language, we had learning disabilities, we have intellectual disabilities, and next week we're going to have physical disabilities. So I put 9 and 11 in unit 2 because I wanted it to be the stuff that's a little bit more common. And then when we get into unit 3, then it's like, it's autism and ASD and emotional and gifted and things like that. So it's looking really good. Okay, questions from the gallery. I love that you guys stuck in. How about one question each, and I'll let you go. One question each.
Okay, my question, sorry.
I'm silly about that in class. Like if I'm in class, I'm like, I'll just wait until you tell me one of your questions. I'll just wait for 3 from the whole class.
Again, with the definitions for the AAID and the IDA of the intellectual disabilities, when they're doing like the IEP process or even the 504, is it labeled IDEA process or like the AAID?
They would
like on there
in the IEP.
Mm-hmm.
They would remember they only look at 13 categories
Mm.
based on what IDEA has set forth.
Okay.
So the category would be called intellectual disability, right? So IDEA would say, this child has been identified through this process of standardized test and all this data collection to have an intellectual disability, not a diagnosis, but a categorical, basically range of supports, right? So if we've determined that this student had, we checked their eyes and we checked their ears and they don't need glasses, they don't need hearing aids, we would not put them in someone with visual like impairment, right? We would, we took those away. We took those off the table. Their ears are fine. Their eyes are fine. We're not going to treat them under visual impairment. We treat them under intellectual disability. We treat them, or we support them. Treat is a doctor term. We support them based on the needs of that category. So with intellectual disability, it could look like they might need a speech and language pathologist. They might need a related service like SLP. They might need OT. They might need PT. They might need social skills. They might need a bunch of different things. So intellectual disability, even though we have 13 categories by IDEA, once you go into that one category, it expands to include many different things that that student particularly needs. But you would say this IEP, here's a hint. If you go back to chapter 4, I included a video, just me in my house last year, where I put up the chapter and my son's IEP right next to each other. And it shows you the categories that he is labeled under. And that's it. They would just say his category would be intellectual disability. Right? And then inside of there, we would identify for the teacher, for the related services, what that looks like for that child. The definition doesn't change. It's just a category, like a column.
But the definition would be off of the idea, the top
IDEA.
of the two. They would go off of idea.
Right. Whereas the regional center, like Professor Fernandez said, the regional center who talks about all the parts of this child, they would probably use the AAIDD definition because it is more specific to a whole life, where IDEA just talks about school. Does that make sense?
Great question.
Very good. Okay, who's next?
I don't even know what to ask. Oh gosh. For the adaptive behavior, was that just like specifically that that's like the sign of of this category, or
Look at
And-
adaptive behavior is almost kind of like what like Alicia was talking about, like that motivation piece, the thing that makes a child want to meet a goal even if it's hard, if they're struggling. Adaptive behavior is like if you and I like saw like $100 bill like up a tree, what would we do to get it? We
It's
get a
like-
ladder, we
yeah.
get a box. Like, so adaptive skills are, can they function in this way? Can they meet their goals? Can they meet their needs? If not, then we either teach them or support them.
so this is like how you determine whether they're in this category?
It's part of it. It's cognition. So cognition is it, and then adaptive, or a synonym for
Oh, okay.
adaptive would be like daily living.
So let's
Yeah.
like this here, like here.
Yeah.
This is how I look at it. Like, okay, so this is talking a little bit more about adults and maybe teenagers, but like interpersonal. So like interpersonal skills with a preschooler is, hi, my name is Sarah. Will you be my friend?
Mhm.
That's a skill. It's weird. We're so grown. Sometimes we forget those are skills, right? Responsibility. Wait, where's your backpack? Where's your lunch bag, Sarah? I don't know. Remember, we got to keep an eye on that. Put it in our cubby. That's a skill to be built. If this person has a lot of the deficits here, then we support that side of deficit. Some people have all the deficits. Some people have all of them, but mild. Some people have all of them, but severe. Some people just have certain areas.
Mhm.
Right? Some people just have certain areas that they're great and you wouldn't know, but they can't pay a bill on time. They can't meet a deadline. They miss the bus every time. They're late for work. They don't know how to do laundry. There's certain things. And again, with little kids, we can see because they're so little. They've only been on the planet for a couple of years. We can identify where their deficits are as we observe them as leaders in their world. We can kind of see that. And again, the adaptive skills is one of what you said, 7 or 8 different sections, Alicia?
It's seven. If you think of it like, okay, so let's say you have cognition, right? And so you have a child, let's give them a diagnosis. Let's say you have a child with Down syndrome. They read, they learn to read, right? So their cognition may look less impaired because they're reading, let's say at a 2nd grade level, right?
Mhm.
But then all of a sudden I ask them, let's say we're in 5th grade and they're reading at a 2nd grade level, right? So their cognition is mild, not too bad. And then all of a sudden, the adaptive skills of what they're reading, well, not I want to use cognition. Let's say the adaptive skills of walking home, they can't do because they can't figure out how to get home.
They get lost or
They
distracted.
get right. So the cognition is only mildly impaired, but they're dangerous to walk home. That's the adaptive portion. So that's where both of them have to work together. You have to have high cognition and you have to have typical cognition, and you have to be able to live on this planet. I mean, how many people do you know who are like barely living and yet are geniuses? You know what I mean? It takes two. Or how many people on this planet have, a pristine life, but are just, you go, what choices did I make? Like, so you can see where the two worlds have to come together. You have to have cognition. You have to be able to read and then put into action what you read on this earth. And you have to be able to take care of yourself. And that's the adaptive part.
Yeah, I tested that with my son a couple months ago, and he was like, he said something like, well, I'm going to run away, and typical, whatever. I'm gonna run away. And I said, okay, well, where do you want to go? He said, I want to go to X, Y, and Z. And I said, okay, get in the car, let's go. You tell me where to drive. I'll drive you there. Couldn't do it. It was 13. And it was something like 2 miles away. And it was like, okay, that was like my little test. Like, can this kid actually, function?
That's the adaptive part. And that's where a lot of like your 20s are figuring out, like you guys are figuring out how to live on this planet on your own. Those are all adaptive skills. All of them are adaptive skills. And that's the other part of the intellectual disability. You have the cognition, the processing, thinking, language through, and then you have, how do I live on this planet?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, I mentioned that guy that I worked with who had a stroke, and we sat him down with a phone, and I said, well, how would you dial 911? And he's like, well, yeah, donut. And I was like, so he has language. He would take a shower every day. He would feed himself donuts if he could, but to press numbers on a phone, he could not do it. We even got one of those phones with the pictures on just buttons with pictures. There was no numbers on it. And it was like fire department, police, the manager, mom, sister, blah, blah, blah. He couldn't even identify a picture. So it was this piece where, like, this guy's like alive and breathing and relatively healthy. But the parents were like, of course, old and retired. And they're like, well, when are you going to get him housing? And I was like, it's not safe. It's not safe to get him housing. He cannot live alone. He cannot.
It's those two components.
Yeah. So
yeah,
again,
that's for adaptive.
Yeah, but little kids, it looks a little bit different. It's almost like, like sometimes you'll see kids who are like, yeah, I'm learning how to potty train. And I know I can say, it's time for me to go potty, so I don't potty in my diaper or my pull-up, whatever. And then, they look really successful. Then all of a sudden they're not being successful and they're wetting themselves. And so sometimes the skills kind of come up and kind of come down. They haven't cemented them in. And it's like, you see them where they want to adapt, but they're just maybe a little bit behind, or they're struggling a little bit. But your question on is like, is that the definition? It's part of the piece of the puzzle. It's not the defining factor. It's just part of the piece of the puzzle.
It's just part of it. Yeah.
Right. And again, and Luce, are you still there? Are you on? You have a question? Okay, well, we went super duper long, and I had my little hat montage. I was looking for my taco hat and I can't find it, but I'm gonna
save it for another day.
Oh yeah, seriously. I mean,
A Tuesday.
I'm looking good.
Tuesday taco.
It's looking good. So again, have a great and safe and like good weekend. It's gonna be weird out there, but have fun. I remember like, oh, it's Halloween's gonna be on a Sunday. Well, wait, I'm gonna be tired on Monday. But
speaking of Halloween, an adaptive skill for a young child for Halloween is knock, 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 trick or treat, not knock and run, or knock and run inside, or take all the candy.
Right, wait your turn, and then
so
say
those are all adaptive.
and then say thank you and stuff like that. So and my kid was like, I don't want to have to wear a mask. Well, he wanted to be a fox, and so I got him a fox gator mask. So it looks like a ski mask. It's like a ski mask, but it's a fox. I was like, haha, you're wearing a mask. If you want to go trick-or-treating, you're going to do it safely.
Happy Halloween, guys.
Yay. Yeah. Great seeing you all. I love our time together. And, thank you, Professor Fernandez, for making this just so much more dimensional, and having an expert, every week is just undeniable. So
no, I love it. I just sit here and speak out sometimes. Thank you.
Okay, again, reach out if you guys need any help. And again, if you have questions on portfolio or the film analysis, let us know. But I mean, those should be pretty easy, and you guys should have fun with those. Have a good time.
I have a question that's off the record.
Okay, let me stop.